Lately, I've been thinking about my own family's history, our journey with Lyme disease, and trying to figure out what's really changed since 1999 when my daughter was first diagnosed. And I hate to say, not very much. We are still advocating for proper diagnosis. We're still advocating for appropriate medical care. We still advocate for medical establishment to recognize Lyme disease and other tick-borne diseases for the scourge that they really are, one that leaves thousands sick and disabled each year. This is a disease that has been sidelined by political influence and financial interests, and it is the patients and their families who pay the price. We are still fighting misinformation that is spread through ignorance and malfeasance. The tick has to be attached for 24, 36, or 48 hours. Not true. You will always get a bullseye rash if infected. Not true. The test was negative. You don't have Lyme. Tests are totally unreliable. And then the most dreaded one for me is 1 dose of doxy, and you won't get Lyme disease. That said, I wouldn't be up here if I didn't think there wasn't hope. Thanks to the dedication and perseverance of people like Mary Beth and Dr. O'Hara, who risk their livelihoods to speak out, who aren't afraid to admit the standard protocols don't work, and are willing to look for real answers and better treatment. I lost my place. Lyme disease was the hardest thing I've ever had to face. You fight for a diagnosis, you fight for treatment, you fight for insurance coverage, you fight for IEPs for your kids in the schools. You have to contend with your own family and friends who don't believe the illness is real. It's a devastating, insidious disease that can level the strongest and most successful among us. There is hope, and you can get through it. It may not be how you thought. It may not be as fast as you hoped. You may give up things you thought you could never live without. But 27 years after that first diagnosis, my family is healed. My children are well. They're both happy, healthy adults with their own families. And thanks to the support and encouragement of First Selectman Rudy Marconi here in Ridgefield, Lyme Connection celebrates its 23rd year this spring. We're an all-volunteer group made up of people who are often struggling with their own illness, that of a family member, or both. We have worked tirelessly to bring vital information to the community on best protection practices, how to find help if you've been infected, and how to advocate for your children in school. We have also partnered with organizations across the country to work on legislation at the state and federal levels. We do this in the hope that we might protect another family from having to go through what we've gone through. And we do this in the hope that we can bring these diseases to the forefront of the conversation, so they finally get the recognition, funding, and attention we so desperately need and deserve. Tonight's first speaker is Mary Beth Pfeiffer. Mary Beth Pfeiffer is an investigative reporter whose journalism has earned more than 100 local, state, and national awards, including the very prestigious Courage in Journalism Award from Lyme Connection. I will say, Mary Beth was the first reporter to really dig into Lyme disease, dig into the Lyme disease debate. In a three-year series of articles from 2012 to 2015, Mary Beth redefined Lyme and tick-borne illness as a woefully mismanaged epidemic. She validated the experiences of misdiagnosed Lyme patients. She exposed the flaws of diagnostic tests and inadequate treatments. Her second book, Lyme, the First Epidemic of Climate Change, was published in 2018. Since then, she has covered the pandemic as well, with the same critical eye on government policies that failed patients while continuing to cover Lyme disease. Mary Beth.
met many of you at previous events, and it's really great to be here again. So, progress and pitfalls. This is the name of my presentation. The unknown war on Lyme disease. So we'll have a little bit of each: progress, pitfalls. Here, this is one of the pitfalls, not progress. And let's hope we don't see this sort of thing again, but it really was unprecedented, which is why I wrote the story I wrote. And the post that the city of Bridgeport put up, basically, multiple tick species. It's a scary, the word is just scary. For health and environmental safety, containment efforts. It sounds like a nuclear waste dump, and it's probably as harmful, really, to some people, to many people. Okay, just one thing about this. I'm not seeing that when I click. So if I'm going to follow my presentation, that's a problem. Okay, while you figure that out for me, I'm going to talk about a local story, a Connecticut story first. And this is a happy story. It has a good ending. And I wrote about a boy of 10 named Troy, who lived outside of Hartford. And he got Lyme disease, age 10, was treated for it, went on with his life. He got better. 6-7 weeks later, people can hear me while they're going.
She's going to get you a microphone in a second, but when you turn.
Okay. But I want to be able to see here, but I'm seeing here. Anyway, 6-7 weeks later, Troy has the flu. He falls apart completely. His mother keeps trying to tell doctors, but he just had Lyme disease. Nobody wanted to hear it. He is connected ultimately with a hero here, who many of you probably recognize, Dr. Charles Ray Jones, who at that time was 87 years old. I was there in the house when he first met Troy, and he's having his first conversation with Troy, who can't walk, who can't speak, who spent months in that bed in the living room of his home. So anyway, Dr. Jones, there's too few Dr. Joneses in this world. He has since passed, as you probably know, but like Dr. O'Hara, he was doing great work to bring children back from the brink, and he did that with Troy. This is 2 years later. Troy had an assortment of antibiotics, and this is Troy now. In college, doing really well, and it is to the credit of people like Dr. Jones that he's doing as well as he's doing. Okay, did I just skip something? Anyway, it's still not coming up. I'm just going to watch. No, I'll just look at the at this and speak. Okay, so first a little bit about me. As Karen said, an investigative reporter. I worked at a small community newspaper for many years where I was very lucky to have editors who supported investigative journalism and gave me lots of time to work on my stories. So what I did is, and this is me when I'm 29 and just had more or less joined the staff of the Poughkeepsie Journal, and this is me when I retired in 2016, 17. Yeah. So I did kind of the standard stuff, injustice and carrying the torch against bad government and conflicts of interest, and I got a couple of people arrested and fired, and I improved conditions in New York State prisons. There was a law passed to keep people out of solitary confinement. So anyway, To my great surprise, I found all of this stuff, all this corruption and waste of money and injustice in Lyme disease. So I began in 2012 to cover Lyme disease. And what took me so long? As I said to somebody before I drank the Kool-Aid, I was of the belief that Lyme was relatively easy to diagnose and to treat. And the people who had that protracted case of Lyme, they were the anomaly. What I found was much different from that reality. And as I start to look into Lyme disease, what do I find? I don't find that they're worried, the officials in charge are worried about the fact that ticks are spreading everywhere, that cases are soaring, that kids are sick. They're concerned with antibiotics and this group of doctors who is giving too many antibiotics. So then I go on to the tests and I discover, and this is, I'm peeling the layers of the onion here and finding things out that I just never knew existed, that the CDC basically admitted that the Lyme disease tests don't work. I was talking to scores of patients by that point and many doctors who were giving me these things and saying, you gotta look into this. And so, and what I found was that, okay, the CDC admits that the Lyme disease tests don't work, but what do they say? They more or less, they dismiss it. They say, okay, wait and it'll eventually test positive. Great, that's a really good thing to do with this spirochete. Let it run loose in your body until you test positive. And they were also acknowledging that 10 to 20% of people stay ill even after they're diagnosed early and treated. But it's no big deal. It's only, now it would be about 100,000 people a year, conservatively. Okay, so here we are today. We're still waiting for a better test. Okay. This is one of the stories I covered. This is a boy, junior in high school, by the name of Joseph Ilone. He went to summer camp, came home sick, went to the pediatrician twice, was tested, tests failed. He collapsed on his front lawn from Lyme carditis. When he's taken to the emergency room, they don't believe that he's got any such thing. He's on drugs. So what's also interesting is at that point, and his case got a lot of attention because I've been covering Lyme disease for a while. At that point, the CDC didn't like me. And 5 months later in Dutchess County, somebody else, a 38-year-old man, collapses and dies from Lyme carditis. At that point, there was only 4 Lyme carditis deaths in the medical literature. It's much more common than you would think. Okay, so here we are again, the theme of Lyme tests don't work. The Tick-Borne disease working group, which is a great development in raising awareness of Lyme disease, looks at all the evidence and concludes in 2022, as we all know, there's no accurate diagnostic test for any stage of Lyme disease. Okay. And again, here we are now in 2026, and a new study comes out. This is from an article in LymeDisease.org, study in the Journal of Clinical Microbiology. Cleared testing methods miss between 64 and 78% of cases. Okay, so just to go through some of the, here we are today, what the problem is, and we're just seeing Lyme disease cases go up and up. Granted, in the last 2 years on that slide, 2022 and 2023, they seem to have leaped, but they did redefine the case definition of Lyme disease. But that only means that these bars should be much higher to begin with. You know, they caught up. But you'll also notice that the last bar, 2023, we're over 80,000 reported cases. I was shocked to see this because I brought myself up to date a little bit in preparing this presentation. I've been paying a lot of attention to the pandemic in the last 5 years. So anyway, the CDC also acknowledges that for every reported case, there are probably 10 cases. So are we looking at 800,000, a million cases a year, potentially? And we also are seeing that funding for Lyme disease research is going up. It's not going up nearly as much as it should. Those two bars there for fiscal 23 and 2024 are to the great credit of the Center for Lyme Action, which is really doing great work to get Congress on board. But still, we are just not anywhere near where we should be. And this is where we are, or at least where we were in 2016, and I'm going to update those in a second. $85 per patient, per Lyme patient, all the way over there. And we're spending a ridiculous amount of money for malaria. Not if you have malaria, it's an important disease, but relatively speaking, $97,000 for HIV and on. West Nile. Does anybody know anyone who has had West Nile disease? Okay, we got it. All right. And how many know people who have had Lyme disease? Okay. My point. Anyway, this is just to update it, and it's still the same right now as it was in 2016. This is something that ChatGPT spit out for me. But you're going to see just a big, lack of funding for Lyme disease by case. And I found this very interesting. This is what ChatGPT said. HIV and malaria have very large dedicated NIH research programs. Lyme and West Nile do not. Well, relatively, West Nile is doing okay. So anyway, we're also having another problem, and that is beyond rising cases, we have more ticks, and we have more diseases. Ticks are carrying more than one pathogen often. And here we are in Connecticut, black-legged ticks, deer ticks, nymphs, 44% with at least one disease, one pathogen. Nymphs, as probably many of you know, are really the most dangerous life stage for human beings of the tick in terms of we just don't see them. They're so tiny, much tinier than they look there, and they're easy to miss. And so many more people are infected during the nymph stage. Adults, though, by the time they get to the adult stage, they're on their third blood meal, and a lot more pathogens, and a lot more multiple pathogens. Okay, this is kind of a favorite picture of mine. This is me in 1987. Naively standing in a beautiful field, holding on to my son, who was about 2 at that point. And I look at this picture and I say, oh my God, will we ever be able to do something like that again? And this is my son's 2 boys. Thank you. And I am forever saying to them, don't brush up against that grass. Tell mommy when you go home, check yourself for ticks. They both know the drill, but of course things fall through the cracks, and the little guy here named Rowan had one on his neck, the hairline, just 2 weeks ago. So, and just by way of that segue, boys of this age, 5 to 9 years old, they're 6 and 10 right now, have the highest rates of Lyme disease. We need to protect our children. And this is that statistic put another way. Boys and girls, right here, highest rates of Lyme disease. This screams for prevention, primarily, but a lot more beyond that. Better tests, better treatment. Okay, now we get to another problem. We have something called alpha-gal syndrome all of a sudden coming to the fore. at least the media is paying a lot of attention to it because it is growing in leaps and bounds. And it's imparted to us by the Lone Star tick. This is the female Lone Star tick. The male doesn't have that bright back on it. And I just would also note here that Suffolk County, highest number of cases in the United States. That's right across the sound from here, right? Who has seen Lone Star ticks here? Okay, because I've not seen them in the Hudson Valley where I am, so they're not really super common here. Let's hope it stays that way. A little bit more about alpha-gal, but I just put this up by way of saying the best way to protect yourself and your family is to prevent. Really, be vigilant. Watch out for ticks. Stay out of that tall grass that I loved standing in with my son. I can't look at a Monet painting anymore without thinking about ticks. It's really awful. Okay, so, all right, well, what we know, case counts are going up, children are at risk, the tests are still bad. More infections, we got an allergy caused by ticks, an allergy to mammal meat and some mammal products, dairy, and there's very little money being spent. And yet, we still have denial. This is an article from the Canadian Broadcast System. It's fairly recent, a few months ago. And this is the problem, folks, that celebrities are saying they have Lyme disease, and they're making people think that they have Lyme disease. Maybe they really have Lyme disease. There's 1 million cases a year. And also, when you have advanced Lyme disease, good luck getting it treated and diagnosed. And another quote, you can get medically assisted dying easier than treatment for chronic Lyme disease. That's Dr. Richard Horowitz, who has treated for many years, uses dapsone. But like many of the treatments for late stage post-treatment syndrome, Lyme disease, it's not easy to get if you want it. You need a doctor like Dr. Horowitz. And there's just not many doctors like Dr. Horowitz. And they cost a lot of money, too. Okay, so again, more about the problems. Patients still can't get diagnosed. 86% say inadequate physician education. My doctor didn't know that I actually had a rash, even though it wasn't shaped like a perfect bullseye. There are so many flaws in doctor education for Lyme disease. False negative lab test, again, back to the test. Okay, patients still can't get care. They have to fly and drive and cross state lines. And here we are today with the same problem. Okay, now about this time, or at least at the end, people say to me, but we have a vaccine that's coming, right? And we can protect ourselves with a vaccine. And I would say, no, you cannot rely on a vaccine, especially a vaccine for Lyme disease. There are too many other critters inside the belly of these ticks. So that's problem number one, or it's up high. It only targets a single pathogen, namely Lyme. It's at its best 75% of the time it might work. Oh, and by the way, 4 doses. You need 4 doses. How many people are going to come back and get all those doses? It's just impractical. And the previous go-around was similar. I think it was 2 or 3 doses. Similar technology failed before. Okay, so I wouldn't rely on that. There has been research into an anti-tick vaccine in which they give us something that when it comes into contact with the saliva of the tick falls off and dies. We kill the tick because of the vaccine we might have. That would be kind of ideal because anything else in that tick goes away. But the Connecticut doctor the scientist who was doing a lot of the work on that, Stephen Weichel, has retired, and there's not too much going on about it now. Okay, so we're going to get to some good news, really. There has to be some good news. Okay, there is recognition that Lyme disease persists. And we've had scientific research for the last 15 years at least that has been building on the ways in which the spirochete can go into hiding when under assault by doxycycline, the Lyme spirochete goes into various organs and kind of goes into hibernation and lays low until the coast is clear. It does persist because we've done studies on macaques, rhesus monkeys, and on mice that show, infect them, treat them, test them again. We know that they have Lyme disease, but they don't test positive. Lo and behold, when we euthanize these animals, we find the spirochetes in their brains and their livers and their all over. So, but anyway, the CDC is getting to that point where it's accepting it. Long COVID helped with that. The long line all of a sudden became a thing, that we could have this post-infectious syndrome. So that's good. I'm seeing medical journals opening up, yada, yada, yada. I'll show you now. Okay, so we have something called IACI. It's a really exciting name. But this is a CDC publication on something called infection-associated chronic conditions and illnesses. They've given it a name. So starting with COVID is on this list of maybe 8 illnesses. Lyme disease is on that list. They are acknowledging, the CDC is acknowledging that there is something called chronic post-treatment, whatever. They're calling it IACI. You need a new name. Okay, and then this gave me great, I just got so excited when I saw this like 2 days ago on the HHS, Health and Human Services website. This is something you wouldn't have seen, 5 years ago. Invisible illness, Lyme disease, and it goes through, people stay sick. It's a multi-system illness, as many of you know. So that was really encouraging to see that. Another encouraging thing is that, as I said, journals are starting to accept certain versions of Lyme disease, and one of them is that it can be passed in utero. And this is an article I wrote in 2019 for Scientific American. I was really excited. Wow, they accepted this. And what I was relying on for this article was about 30 years worth of reports about fetuses dying in utero or being stillborn or being otherwise harmed by the spirochetes that were passed to them by their mother in utero. But anyway, it took 6-7 years, but just a couple of months ago, Frontiers in Medicine published this wonderful article, basically reviewing the literature on the ability of Lyme disease to be passed in utero. And that's big that they have done that. So I look forward to more acceptance on that. And this is an opinion article that Bruce Fries, you might know, he's very active in Lyme disease causes, wrote for LymeDisease.org. And he says, this article that I just showed you refutes the IDSA. Now the IDSA I could talk about for a long time, but the IDSA developed the dogma that pervades and has pervaded Lyme disease for a long, long time. And as I wrote my articles, I learned about the kind of connections between the IDSA, the CDC, the NIH. They were all we're of the same mind, and no other view of Lyme disease was allowed in. And one of the articles I wrote was based on 3,000 emails that you may know Chris Newby, who wrote the book Bitten. She had given me these emails back before she wrote Bitten, and she was doing something else. So she said, take a look at these. So in one of them, I find an email from the guy in NIH who gives out all the grants, oversees all of that. He's retiring. He writes to someone in CDC, another scientist, and he says, I'm really sad about retiring. I'm going to miss all you guys. I will not miss the Lyme loonies. He felt free enough to say that in a government email, and that is basically why this view has been withheld for so very long. Okay, so Dr. O'Hara will talk about treatments, so I'm kind of a little cowed about doing that. But anyway, this is a kind of an interesting development that just happened within the last month or so. And there have been studies of different drugs that are in the FDA library, and in one review of many different drugs, they found that something called piperacillin, which is an antibiotic, was really, really good at killing the Lyme disease bug. And it did that at doses 100 times lower than your standard antibiotic, and it didn't harm the gut microbiome. And I'm really particularly excited about that because we have a lot of drugs in our armament of pharmaceuticals. But these days they don't get used. They're not given a shot. There were drugs I wrote about during COVID I think should have been used. But we live in a world in which the evening news is basically bought and paid for by pharma. And all we get is expensive pharmaceuticals that cost, $1 billion or something, they say, to get to market. And they're mostly for chronic illnesses. They don't cure. So, anyway. And this was published, by the way, in Science Translational Medicine, which is good. It shows breakthrough kind of thing. Okay, lastly, I'm going to just talk a little bit about one test that's in development for Lyme disease. And it's one that I particularly like. Full disclosure, my friend Holly Ahern is involved in developing this test. It is further along than I think most any test that's supposedly going to come to market in the next couple of years. And it's one test. It uses the equipment that any laboratory would have. And the results of testing, what they do is they test samples of blood that are known to be from people who had Lyme disease. They are basically, signed, sealed, and delivered Lyme disease against controls. So how well did that test do in those studies? Did really well, 91% accuracy. So if you're given a positive sample, you want to find out that it is indeed positive, and you see that 144 versus 13. If it was negative, you want to have higher number there. Negative, you want to match up the negatives, you want to match up the positives, and this test did that. So I'm really excited about that. There's some other tests in development that could be good. There's one based on this little bit of stuff that they found in the bodies of, and in the joints in particular, of people with Lyme disease. Peptidoglycan, I think it's called. And that potentially could be a marker of Lyme disease, of late Lyme disease. But it's not as far along as this test. Okay, so I'm just going to end with, please read my articles. You can find them all at thefirstepidemic.com. That's my website. And you'll see stories like this if you follow me. And I'll also tell you where I'm published. So anyway, I walked the catwalk for Lyme disease. That was really fun. We raised some money. I wrote the article at kind of brings me here today. I also did an update of the Lyme tests that you can read about. And I did a kind of interesting story here, my most recent, about a doctor with Lyme disease who treated herself with a certain substance and cleared her Lyme disease. She's in the best shape she's been in 15 years, she said. And separately, I also wrote about using that substance for autism. It's really interesting territory that I've gotten into post-Lyme. And Lyme really opened the door for me to look at medicine in a different way. And by the way, the treatment is chlorine dioxide, and it is not bleach, despite what FDA may have you believe. Anyway, please subscribe to Rescue Substacks. That's where my articles are published. They're also in Trial Site News, but this one's free. Rescue Substack. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Beth. That was really very interesting. You were discussing finding ticks in unexpected places. And actually, that's what happened to my family this past weekend. That's what happened to us this weekend. Many times we're told frolicking in the woods, going for hikes, going to the beach, you can find a tick. For us this weekend, I spent the entire weekend cleaning my house upside down. We found a tick on our balcony. It was a second floor balcony. And my husband, I believe he's the one who stepped out on the balcony to fix something, picked up a tick and brought it into my daughter's room. Right, it was a second floor balcony. So we think it's migratory birds that brought the tick. But luckily my daughter and my other daughter are well aware of ticks, and she identified it. To our, great fortune, it was not engorged. I just had it tested. It was a dog tick, but we spotted it before it latched onto anyone. So this is just a reminder that exposure can happen anywhere, at any time of the year. And by the way, we do live in Richfield. So 2 years ago, I thought, like many others, that ticks mainly carried Lyme disease. I've since learned they can also spread infections like Babesia and Bartonella, which cause serious long-term health issues and often go undiagnosed. In my own family, 2 people were affected by tick-borne illness without ever seeing a tick or developing a bullseye. One endured years of unexplained symptoms, which were dismissed, told that it is in her head, before finally receiving a proper diagnosis. And that journey eventually led us to Dr. Nancy O'Hara. Dr. O'Hara is an internationally recognized expert in integrative and functional medicine, specializing in Lyme disease, Babesia, Bartonella, PANS, PANDAS, and chronic illness. Dr. O'Hara is also known for mentoring and educating practitioners around the world, helping expand awareness and treatment approaches for complex chronic illness. And today we're lucky to have Dr. O'Hara discuss Lyme, co-infections, and approaches to treatment and recovery. Please join me in welcoming Dr. O'Hara.
Hi, everybody. I want to start by saying the talk I'm about to give in the next 40 minutes could take me 40 hours or 400 hours, and I still wouldn't cover it all. So I know there's a lot of information in it. My slides are available to you. If any of you are going to get up and lecture about it, please just quote me if you use any of the slides. But some of the slides I'm going to go through quickly because there's so much information and I want to focus on the most important parts. My mentor was Dr. Sidney Baker, who, like Dr. Charles Ray Jones, is one of the most brilliant men I've ever met, and I am lucky enough to be mentored by many brilliant people. And Sid always said to me, tell him how you got here. And, I was a card-carrying pediatrician, all the regular stuff that all of you go through. I was that person until I went through 5 years of infertility. I used to teach kids with autism, and I had a lot of kids with autism in my practice. And I found Dr. Baker as a patient. And after 5 years of infertility, in 6 weeks I was pregnant. And that started me on a journey of looking at functional medicine, root cause medicine, what is behind everything else. And then I had my son, neurotypical, and at age 9, he developed, and don't tell him I talked about him if any of you see him, so anyway, that includes you, Claudia. He developed seizure-like tics out of the blue, and that's when I became an expert in pandas, because it was very hard to find anybody else who could do it. He had been bitten by a Lyme-positive tick, he had strep throat, I treated him for Borrelia, I treated him for strep, he was better in 3 months. Several years later, he developed striae on his back. I had missed Bartonella. Several years later, he had babesia. I had probably missed that too. And so I'm here to say, you know, give yourself all grace. You are at the front lines of understanding this, but you can't know what you don't know. And part of my learning comes from what I've done with my own child and my husband. When he had Lyme disease, nobody around here would even treat him. This was 30 years ago. And I was the one giving him IVs at home because nobody else would, and I had the ability to do it. But this is a clinical diagnosis. We don't have any good tests. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about is how clinically you can know whether your child has one of these and things you can do about it with a little help from somebody who will help you out, but not necessarily from a doctor who will only prescribe a day of doxycycline. So I am on the executive board of ILADS, who is a big part of the IACI and really working with the current government to make this more of a forefront, and the Medical Academy of Pediatrics and Special Needs, which is at the forefront of all functional medicine in pediatrics. And I'm going to talk about all this stuff. So this is one of my favorite quotes that Sid always used: follow those who seek the truth, but flee from those who have found it. I had a patient just last week who had positive Quest IgM Borrelia. All I wanted to do was put the kid on doxycycline. They went to their pediatrician to confirm that what I was saying was correct, and the pediatrician said to them, and I'm sorry if you're in the audience, but if you are, come up to me afterwards, pediatrician, said that if anybody calls themselves a Lyme literate doctor, they're illiterate, and more than one day of doxycycline is worthless. So I hope that that child does not continue in my practice, because I'll be dealing with chronic Lyme for many years to come. But those of us who want to learn, who want to keep looking, that's the type of person you're looking for, whether it be a health coach, a naturopath, a doctor, a friend, whatever. But if anybody says they have all the answers for Lyme disease, they're wrong. And by the way, if we're still calling it Lyme disease, we're wrong. I know we all have to call it Lyme because we're only letting the rest of the world recognize it, but Lyme is only Borrelia burgdorferi. There are so many species of Borrelia, let alone the Babesia, Bartonella, and everything else, and it's not just ticks. So, not to depress everybody, but anyway. My area of expertise is pandas, but I wanted to show this because even when they wrote this article in 2012, and we're talking about strep and mycoplasma, Lyme was part of it. Now, because this is such a controversial disease, the people that are leading the charge in this research don't want to even talk about Lyme, because it's doubly controversial, but it is included and should be. Lyme disease, vector-borne diseases, are autoimmune diseases. They not only attack the areas that they attack the immune system. And one of the reasons all these tests are negative is because they cause immunodeficiency or immune dysregulation. So if you're doing an immune test to see if a child has Lyme disease, it's going to be negative if it's chronic Lyme, because that Lyme disease has already depleted their immune system. So it's a vicious cycle. It has to do with genetics, okay? There are some of us who are not genetically susceptible. I happen to be one of them. I can be bit by as many ticks as you want, and I probably will never get it. My son, my husband, totally the opposite. One tick on for less than an hour, they've died. So it's a little bit of what's going on genetically, and then what are the other environmental factors? Certainly the healthier we are, the more we eat a healthy diet, the more we don't give ourselves other triggers, the healthier, the more able we'll be to handle this. And then it's the interaction of everything. And I always say the gut is not our second brain. It is our first brain. And if we're not taking care of the gut, we're not going to get better. So we have to think about that to get a clinical outcome of health rather than disease. This slide I love. These are statistics on PANS, but look at this. 500,000. This is by the CDC, and this is what Mary Beth was just talking about. But what we also know in our practice, those children who come in with autoimmune encephalitis, inflammation of the brain, 42% of them have Bartonella. And now, in that population, 41% of the ticks carry Babesia. And what we're not testing for that is also Babesia is Babesia oticoli. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. These are the observations that I see, whether it be acute, as in PANS, or more subacute, or chronic. But these are the things we're looking at: regression, sleep disorders, learning difficulties, handwriting deterioration, tics, hyper-alert appearance, like that deer in the headlights, hallucinations, urinary symptoms, all of those sorts of things. Those are all clinical diagnoses. It's not going to be picked up in your 5 minutes at your pediatrician's office, unless they're having you do questionnaires and being able to spend more time. But you guys know these things and can see them. My little ticks down here. There are many different types of ticks, and for those of you who travel other places, it's important to know the types of ticks and what they carry in that area. In this area, Borrelia, Babesia, and Bartonella are the most common. Babesia and Bartonella more common than Borrelia, which is why I agree with Mary Beth. I'm not sure that vaccine's going to do anything. And actually, one of my dear friends was in the trial of the first vaccine and got symptoms from the vaccine, and was a surgeon and was never able to operate again. But tickencounter.org will show you what ticks carry. There are more than 22 species of Borrelia, and they're from a variety of hosts. It's not just ticks. It can be mice, rats, squirrels, shrew. We're incidental hosts, and it can also, as Mary Beth said, be gestational. And songbirds, I always just call you Cloudy's mom. I'm so sorry. As a pediatrician, I'll see you in the, you are not who you are. You are Tim's mom. You are just, sorry. Anyway, that's the way I think. I don't like adults anyway. I really just like kids. So, songbirds are bringing it. Babesia oticoli, for example, was first discovered in Canada. It's everywhere here. It's the songbirds, it's the deers, but it's also mosquitoes and fleas and bed bugs and everything else. Not trying to depress you. I'm just trying to tell you there are so many vectors that can do this. It can be through breastfeeding. And so we should be talking about this. When we say Lyme disease, no, we're just talking about Borrelia. Of course, we're 90% of the cases, we're one of those states for sure. All along the eastern seaboard, every place I'm licensed, we're in vector-borne disease central. But although the CDC tracks Borrelia, they're not tracking Bartonella or Babesia. They don't even believe Bartonella exists. And several of the people in several of those articles are people that I've worked with, and I want to talk to you about that at the end, about some of the things that they're finding. It's actually in children, 36% have persistent, non-specific symptoms following antibiotic treatment, and they're not being treated. And part of my problem with antibiotics alone is they're just killing the germ. They're not treating the immune system. They're not getting at any other underlying problems in the gut or whatever, and a lot of those kids are having persistent symptoms, and the costs are astronomical. But the costs of us are astronomical too. I don't want to belittle that. I'm a girl from West Virginia. I walk around with my mouth open at everything around here, including me, as far as the cost. So, I get it. But again, the research since the 1990s has shown over and over again that neuropsychiatric Lyme is underdiagnosed. As Mary Beth said, it's the children that are most at risk. 5 to 9, I extended on to 15. And the ELISA testing, the two-tier testing, it was meant for surveillance, for following. It was never meant as a diagnostic test. It is no greater than positive in half the cases. Half the cases are getting missed by that test. And these are really important studies, in my opinion, looking at millions of people in this Denmark's National Register. The rate of mental health disorders, affective disorders, suicide, depression, anxiety, OCD, death by suicide was much, much higher in those with tick-borne disease. And Rosalie Greenberg, who's here in New Jersey, found that 80% of her patients that came to her for any type of neuropsychiatric illness had tick-borne disease in the background. That's huge percentages. And I think there are even many more than that. And the rash in children is no more than 36%. In our practices and the practice that we've surveyed, it's 20%. So never depend on a rash to decide whether you have tick-borne disease. I love pictures, I learn in pictures. This is your typical bullseye rash. You guys all know that. You're almost never gonna see it. It may look like that in a hairy area. It may look like that in a behind the knee or in the armpit. It may look more like this. I will never forget this picture, and I show it all the time because the mom sent me this on my phone when I was in the Denver airport, and she said, my pediatrician is calling DCF and reporting me for child abuse. And I said, that's not child abuse, that's Lyme disease. And the next day, it looked like this, much more classic. So again, they can look very different. And then what's this? Can you guys see that? See the stretch marks, the striae? That's Bartonella. And Bartonella, they're blanching, meaning when you press on them, they change color, and they do not follow dermal lines. So you can have stretch marks from being pregnant, from gaining or losing weight. Those follow the lines of the body. Bartonella striae are either horizontal or vertical or in weird places like on your knee or behind your head, etc. So that's my son. Anyway, if you find a tick, where I prefer to send it is to tickreport.com, because although our local health departments do test for it, they're really only testing for Borrelia around here. It's next to impossible to get many of the towns to test for Babesia or Bartonella. You can test for everything with tickreport.com, and I think it's still about $100.
Comprehensive is 200, basic 60.
Okay, comprehensive is 200, sorry. I try not to remember those things. Do not do 1 dose of doxycycline. If you can't get your doctor to do anything else for a tick bite, think about other ways to treat it. Ledum is a homeopathic. These are all herbals. And you can do that. Cat's claw, Japanese knotweed, Artemisia annua, cryptolepis, stevia to make it all taste better, but also because it's a biofilm buster and helps the others penetrate more deeply, and then help the gut with a little bit of fiber or modified citrus pectin. But the research is showing that herbals can be just as good, and in some cases, cryptolepis, for example, is better than any antibiotic in treating Borrelia, Babesia, and Bartonella. There are research-proven studies that show that. So you can do this. You can do it with a lot of different people. Tetracyclines for 1 month minimum, and it may be 3 months. It should be 2 months symptom-free. So if your child gets the flu 30 days after a tick bite, that flu probably isn't the flu, it's the malaise of tick-borne disease. And you need treatment for 2 more months. So Bartonella and Babesia, polyinfections, as Mary Beth said, make things much more complicated, but they're much more common. 40% of the kids in our practice have Babesia or Bartonella. It increases the severity of the illness, it makes diagnosis more difficult, clinical presentation more complex, live diagnostics are even worse for Bartonella and Babesia, and a higher risk of long-term failure. And this picture is just there to say it's all interactive. Everything that happens, part of My problem with conventional medicine these days is we have a doctor for everything, but we need a more global approach. When a disease like this affects every organ in the body, you're not going to get the right answer necessarily from your gastroenterologist or your neurologist or your rheumatologist. We all have to come together into one medical home to really understand the body. And I'm not dissing conventional medicine. Both my parents were doctors. You know, they're good people. They just are, a lot of times when it comes to tick-borne disease, uninformed or misinformed. So, Bartonella. I want to talk a little bit more about this. You've heard about Bartonella maybe from cats. Cat scratches, it's often called cat scratch disease, but it can be cat saliva, it can be dogs, fleas, lice, but it can also be tick bites. And one of the people that's done the most research in this, and then is one of the people that was on one of Mary Beth's articles, is Ed Breitschwartz. And Ed is a guru of Bartonella. He's a veterinarian. He found that Bartonella is probably in all of us, but most of us, if we have functioning immune systems, can handle it. What he found during the AIDS epidemic was that once they got AIDS, then Bartonella started to cause a problem. And I think we're seeing much more because I think COVID has reactivated a lot of these chronic tick-borne, vector-borne diseases. And we're seeing that COVID may lower our immune defenses, and then these vector-borne diseases become more prevalent. There are some more of the blanching stretch marks. There are tons of species. Ed just told me there are more than 60 different species of Bartonella. And I'm not going to go through any of these, but I want to show you all of them. And again, you're welcome to my slides. But multiple. And why do I have that guy there? Can anybody tell me? Why is that guy there on my Bartonella slide?
Rage.
Exactly. You got a kid with daily rage. He's probably got Bartonella. Don't mean to be sexist, it could be her, but okay. So what are the symptoms of Bartonella? Certainly similar to Borrelia, it can be joint aches, muscle aches, and if anybody has migratory pain, Lyme disease, vector-borne diseases are really the only thing that can cause migratory pain. So think about that. Headache, certainly. The processing speed with Bartonella is incredibly slow. Incredibly slow. And so if your child is not processing things quickly, that's another sign of Bartonella. Migratory neuropathy and fasciculation. Remember I told you my son got ticks. Should have thought about Bartonella. I didn't even know Bartonella existed. That was 20 years ago. But that ticky feeling, that angsty feeling, the little jiggliness, so to speak, can be Bartonella. You can diagnose Bartonella just from the eyes. Bartonella can cause neuroretinitis. But what we see the most, because all of my patients have some type of neurologic or neuropsychiatric symptoms, is the rage and aggression and the daily flare. It's unrelenting. They can also have foot or heel pain. I remember the first time I lectured in Australia, they said, you know, Lyme disease doesn't exist here. And I'm like, yeah, it does. No. We made sure it doesn't exist here. I said it exists. Next kid walks in, has some tickiness, twitchiness, neuropathy, all that. And they go, oh, it's just sensory seeking behaviors. He's autistic. I'm like, no, he has Bartonella. No. And then he says he's folding up his socks in his shoes. And I said, it's Bartonella, because they often do that to comfort the foot and heel pain. And they said, no, it's not that. And I said, well, then take off your shirt. Do you have any rashes? And he took off his shirt, and there was his back. We treated him for Bartonella, and all the symptoms went away. So it's everywhere. It's not just here. These are some of the findings we see in the eyes. You know, if you can't get a test, you think your child has Bartonella, go to a good ophthalmologist or an optometrist and have them take a look at the eyes and see if they see any neuroretinitis. That means inflammation, like of the optic nerve. How do we prove it? In my opinion, it is history and physical exam. The test, there is no good, inexpensive, covered by insurance test. There are some that are good, but there's no great ones, and I'll talk about that. You can see inflammatory markers that are elevated, like CRP, C-reactive protein, cedrate, ANA. ANA is the most likely to be positive, mildly. You could see low CD57, positive C6 peptides. Those are regular labs. You can go to Quest or LabCorp and get those. But the CDC says don't test, because no testing is accurate. Well, they're right. If you do a Bartonella test to Quest or LabCorp, it's going to be negative. But there are labs, and we can talk about which ones that can find it. But again, it's very hard to find it because these things don't want to be found. They're deep within tissue, within cells, within parasites, within, they come and go, they may be at very low levels, and for kids, we were just doing a study with Galaxy Labs, and that's where this slide comes from, looking at testing for Borrelia, Bartonella, and Babesia. And the only children that were positive on direct detect PCR, on culture, and on fluorescent immunoassays were the children we drew for 3 days. And there were only a few of them, and one of them's in the room and the other one's my son. So anyway, but nobody else was positive. And this was in one of the best, most expensive labs in the country. So they're now going back, and one of the reasons I like them is they're going back and retesting all the blood and looking at how we can develop these tests better to find it. But what's happening is there's a low level of Bartonella infection. It goes deep within tissue, so it's very hard to find in a blood test. There are multiple antibiotics. When you have Bartonella, you need to use at least 2 antibiotics, and sometimes more. So, and how long? Well, the minimum amount of time that we have found to rid the body of Bartonella is 9 months. I'm not going to have a kid on antibiotics for 9 months. I don't want to, I occasionally do. But, so I just wanted to list, I'm not going to go through the details of this, but I want to list several of the different antibiotic treatments that you can do for Bartonella. And they're on the next couple of slides, and they do work, absolutely, but you have to have a doctor that will not only prescribe like doxycycline and minocycline, but in addition to that, would prescribe rifampin and azithromycin or methylene blue. And that's very hard to find, especially since Dr. Jones has passed away. But I use, because I've also been trained by several brilliant naturopaths, and you have many of them in this state, how to effectively use herbs in many of our children to treat, and if you can see it, that's on the knee. There's a little stretch mark right there, and this kid had some of the worst Bartonella I've ever seen. But there are multiple different herbs that can be used to treat Bartonella. And I've listed many of them here, and as you can see with everything I list the article that proves that this can be successful. So it's not an opinion, it is based in science. And the dosing is actually based on something called Clark's rule, where you take the child's weight in pounds, divide it by 150, and then if the adult dose is 30, for example, you multiply it by 30. And that's how many drops, for example, you give of one of these herbs. So a 75-pound kid would get 15 drops per dose, for example. So it's not rocket science. But anyway, this is something that I have found in about 75 to 80% of my kids works very well for Bartonella. Petunia with Campsiandra and stevia. And if that doesn't work, switching it out for Japanese knotweed and Cryptolepis. And again, this can be very effective and, in my opinion, a lot more helpful. Also because they're Bartonella in these nests going deeply buried, you often need a biofilm buster. Lumbar kinase is an enzyme that helps to break up the biofilm, and modified citrus pectin, one of my favorites, decreases the inflammation due to tick-borne disease, as well as increases commensal flora, good flora within the gut. Babesiosis is now the most common vector-borne disease. For people that understand vector-borne diseases, babesiosis is very, very common. It often has a flu-like illness first, just like Borrelia, but the CDC says only people that have a weakened immune system or don't have a spleen or have HIV can get babesia. Well, what about other people who have a weakened immune system, like those with pandas, like those with autism, like those with cancer? There are many people with immune dysregulation that can also get babesiosis. So symptoms of babesia: unrelenting headache, a pressure headache, very, very common. Paresthesia, sort of that numbness and tingling, that feeling like, you slept on your arm wrong. Dysautonomia, dysregulation of the autonomic or automatic nervous system. So you're hot when everybody else is cold. You sweat way too much. You pass out when you stand up. Your heart races. But it can also be GI upset. I think about anything the body should do automatically that it's not doing or doing the opposite of everybody else. Often that's babesiosis. Night sweats, if I hear that, it's babesia unless proven otherwise, and to me it almost never gets proven otherwise. There can be rib pain, air hunger, like you feel like you can't catch your breath. And then the most recent one that I've seen is Alice in Wonderland syndrome. And I've had 6 kids that I've treated totally herbally, and they've had Alice in Wonderland syndrome. And if you don't know what that is, Alice in Wonderland, going down the rabbit hole through the looking glass, everything looks distorted. Alice in Wonderland syndrome is when everything looks, feels, sounds distorted. And I have 6 kids that have felt that way for years. And after 6 to 9 months of treatment for babesia, which had never been treated before, and I had no testing, we were treating them herbally, all their Alice in Wonderland symptoms went away. So there are more than 100 species of babesia. Most cases, again, are in the Northeast, and according to the CDC, there's only one that really is a problem. That's, again, misinformation. There are many, and one of the ones that we're seeing much more here is Babesia coli. It cross-reacts on testing with Babesia duncani because there's only one lab, very expensive, that can even test for it. The biggest problem with Oticoli is there are no acute symptoms. It goes straight to chronic. So the symptoms I just showed you on the last slide are still the symptoms of this form of Babesia, but it can be much harder to treat and take much longer. There are tests. Immunoblots are more sensitive than your Western blot, and certainly more sensitive than your ELISA tests. So there are some conventional labs that do immunoblots. The conventional labs still can't, I have a couple of people with a positive Babesia in a regular test, but again, hard to find. There are multiple antibiotics. This is like malaria. So a lot of the malarial medications like atovaquone and malarone are used, clindamycin plus quinine. But the duration of treatment is only 7 to 10 days. That is not enough to eradicate Babesia. We have to treat it longer because I think most of the people may be more chronic. So I listed the antibiotics here, taking atovaquone with FAAP. And then there are other drugs like primaquine and tefenaquine that are also used for babesiosis. I do not use those very much because I still am a doctor and still, sign the Hippocratic Oath that says first do no harm. And the side effects of some of these medications far outweigh the benefits, and especially in children. So, because I only care about kids, I'm not going to treat you guys. Anyway, there are many treatment failures. So when I treat, especially for Babesia, but for any of the tick-borne diseases, again, I'm using herbs. And one of the best for Babesia is Cryptolepis. In fact, in Africa, for malaria, a lot of doctors only use Cryptolepis. They're not using any of the medication. So Cryptolepis works very, very well. So often what I will do is a shorter course of medications and then adding cryptolepis, cat's claw, pulsing around the moon cycles. You say, why? Look, this woman is really crazy. Now we're hearing the moon cycles or something. Because we all used to proliferate around the moon cycles. When we lived in hunter-gatherer society, all of us women used to have our menses around the moon cycles. These days, they may be smarter organisms than we are, but let's call them lower level organisms, like parasites, still proliferate around the moon cycles. And so anything that is parasitic, like Babesia, will proliferate around the moon cycle. And so adding something around those moon cycles can be very helpful in treatment. So always watch for accurate validation studies. Yes, these specialty labs that we sometimes use are very expensive, but the ones that are less expensive aren't necessarily better. And I'm happy if you want to ask me what tests I recommend and don't recommend, I'm happy to tell you, but always ask about that. Tick-borne disease should always be considered with any chronic or neurologic or neuropsychiatric illness. ALS, MS, Parkinson's, autism, Alzheimer's. Dr. Horowitz just published an article on using dapsone for Alzheimer's, and he's presenting at MAPS in the fall on dapsone for autism. The reason for that is a lot of people with those degenerative or neurodevelopmental diseases have tick-borne disease in the background. In the Northeast, the Babesia and Borrelia are both in the same tick, the one that Mary Beth showed us. And mice are a big reservoir. One of the things that can be very helpful is keeping the mice out of your yard with just 3 feet of wood chips. It decreases the mice getting into your yard, which are, field mice are big carriers of ticks. There is a vaccine, and the idea is that maybe if we decrease Borrelia burgdorferi, that it will reduce the prevalence of ticks that are co-infected with Babesia. My verdict's out. So, in my opinion, when we talk about tick-borne diseases, it should always be a multi-system approach. We need to boost the immune system, whether that be with good diet, immune modulating agents like good old turmeric, curcumin, specialized pro-resolving mediators, essential fatty acids. We need to kill Bartonella and Babesia as well as Borrelia with either herbals or prescription antimicrobials. But we also need to think about sleep. We need to think about decreasing inflammatory cytokines. We need to think about the gut. So all of that is really important. And often we need biofilm busters, those enzymes that help to break up the mucus that may be surrounding some of these germs. And we need to treat until a child is 2 months symptom-free, at the minimum. And this roadmap is thanks to Mariah Hinchy, who's an excellent naturopath in Hebron, Connecticut. This is what all of us who do functional medicine try to do. We test for vector-borne diseases. We look for mold because those who are genetically susceptible to tick-borne disease are also susceptible to mold mycotoxin disease. We look for other triggers. COVID reactivated a lot of these more chronic tick-borne diseases. A multitude, I don't have percentages off the top of my head, but a multitude of my patients now have a COVID spike protein of greater than 2,500. Normal is less than 0.1 on that lab. Greater than 2,500, that's they don't read it any higher. It could be 25,000. And that's 4 years after getting any known COVID injection or disease. We need to look at nutrient deficiencies. We need to build the foundation. Are they deficient in vitamin D? Are they deficient in zinc? Are they deficient in magnesium? We need to replenish that. It's hard to change kids' diet. I'm not saying that, but we need to make a diet as anti-inflammatory as possible, which is good oils, good proteins, some vegetables, and not a lot of carbs. And we need to make sure everybody's sleeping because our immune system and our detoxification system regenerate during sleep. We need to balance and rebuild the immune system. Then we need to add the killers. If all we're doing is adding antibiotics, even if it's not just that one day of doxycycline, if we're just doing antibiotics without looking at anything else, we may still be dealing with a lot of chronic Lyme disease. And then it may be as little as 25% improvement in 3 months. But if we get that, we're on the right track. And we use rating scales, we use symptom-free, all of that to make sure we're doing the right thing. So I wanted to list all the herbs, and they're not all of them, but mainly the ones that we think about when we're thinking about each of these, and put that all on one slide. Gotta say again, some people think this is food. This is not food. As my friend Stu Friedenfeld says, there is no such thing as junk food. It's either junk or it's food. This is junk, okay? And most of our standard American diets are just what the acronym is, SAD. And we need to think about addressing that for all of us. And I think we're trying to, but we need to continue to do it. We need to think about immunotherapy, which herbs provides in and of itself. But those are two of my other favorites. And we need to monitor for overgrowth of yeast, not just because of mold, but because we've been on antibiotics for 3 years, and we may kill one thing and let another thing propagate. So there's a lot of treatment pitfalls. But these are clinical diagnoses. Use that sheet, you see them, you can make the diagnosis. It can be subacute, chronic, or acute onset. When we talk about Borrelia, don't forget about Bartonella and Babesia. And again, I list the most common things that we see with those two. And the treatment plan needs to include not just antimicrobials, but also immunotherapy and also treatment of the symptoms. If somebody's not sleeping because they're racing thoughts and everything else, we gotta first get them sleeping. If somebody's so constipated they can't poop more than once a week, anything we put in is gonna make them worse. We gotta treat the constipation first. So we have to treat the symptoms, and I'm a big believer in therapy. As I started my life as a teacher, not my life, but my adult life as a teacher, I'm a big believer in therapy. And the sooner we can treat these things, the better. Better outcomes with more quick treatment is a known fact. So I'm really trying to train people. But even when we know what we're doing, it's a marathon, not a sprint. It takes time to get better. And one thing I try to talk to all the practitioners that I train about is don't blame the child, don't blame the family, and please don't blame yourselves, whether the tick came into your bedroom or whatever else. Give yourself grace. This is a very tough disease, and you're allowing yourself to have some grace is important for your child's healing too. And that goes for dads, but mostly moms. Anyway, you can find me on all these places. I did start a podcast about 1.5 years ago, and many of the people that Mary Beth was in several of the articles I've interviewed, like Ed Breitschwartz and Mikal Tai, who I think is doing some of the most amazing research right now at MIT and Stanford, looking at proteins that we may have in our skin that some people don't have that makes them more susceptible to tick penetration and latching on. Many others, so it's free, please feel free. And I am no longer accepting new patients, but I do have mentoring and membership programs for training. And I appreciate you guys being here. I mean, just looking at this is so important, and don't go where the path may lead. And go instead where there is no path and leave a trail. So thank you all for doing that. And I also need a ton of references.
First is an easy one. Do you use Allison?
Yes. Is there a follow-up to that?
That's the question.
I also tend to be very verbose, so I'll try not to be so.
Okay, how about, I think this is from Mary Beth, Plum Island, biowarfare.
It's all highly suspicious. There's certainly evidence in Chris Newby's book about what we did to manipulate ticks, including a really incredible photograph with pipettes going into the mouths of ticks. So, there's legitimate questions. And one thing I didn't mention when I was talking about alpha-gal, which I find really amazing, is I wrote about it in my book. It was about 2014-15 when it was kind of emerging. And you had a scientist in Virginia and an allergist, a doctor of allergies in Australia. She discovered that it was tick-borne. He discovered what the molecule was at the same time, half a world away. Why? Just saying.
Interesting. Okay, how about, do you feel the IGeneX test is accurate?
Yes, but the fish test, so there are several tests by IGeneX. There's the immunoblot, which is the 20 times more sensitive than any Western blot for Borrelia, Babesia, Ehrlichia, Anaplasma. Very expensive and requires a regulated immune system. So you can have IgG, which should be chronic, and it really is acute and present. You could have IgM, and it's been chronic which should be just acute, and it's been chronic for years. And you can have totally normal, and you still have one of these vector-borne diseases. So the other test is a FISH test, which is a fluorescent immunoassay test that looks for the critters, basically. And it's about 80% accurate for Babesia and Bartonella. So that's better than 50%, but it's a lot of money. So they are accurate. I am always monitoring these, and I am back now because of newer research that it is accurate, but very expensive. So that's its biggest problem, and I can't get them. Even for me, I never got a discount.
Okay. If immune dysregulation exists past COVID, will treatment for vector-borne disease work even though the immune system is dysregulated, or must the immune dysregulation be addressed first?
It doesn't have to be addressed first, but it has to be addressed. You're not going to get better unless you're using herbals or immune modulating agents. It doesn't mean IVIG. If you're not treating tick-borne disease and go straight to IVIG, you can get worse. But there are a lot of good natural immunomodulating agents, like I said, fish oils and turmeric and curcumin, that a lot of practitioners like health coaches, nutritionists, dietitians, naturopaths may be able to help you with. And there are a lot of good ones in this area. But it does need to be treated at least coincident with.
I don't really have anything to add to your answer, but I have a question because I'm a journalist. And in, watching your incredibly well-researched, reflective of your experience presentation here, as a grandmother, as a mother, what supplements would you suggest we give to children who otherwise seem to be well?
It's a great question. 80% of the kids in my practice are vitamin D deficient. You want a vitamin D level between 60 and 80. Vitamin D is essential. You're not going to get enough vitamin D out of a multivitamin, so you need extra vitamin D. 60% of the kids in our practice are zinc deficient. You get most of your zinc from shellfish, from oysters. Kids aren't eating that. You can get it from protein, but then you get alpha-gal, and that's off the list. But so zinc is another one. There are some very good multivitamins that are out there. They're not gummies and they're not chewables. There's a powder like by a company. I can say companies now, can I? Yes, I'm okay. Aspire multivitamin is a very good. I have a very childlike palate. I can't take I have trouble with tastes. This is a good tasting powder. So Aspire Nutrition is the company. They have a powder that's a very good multivitamin. There are others that are good, but I would think about D, zinc, a multivitamin, and then the last is essential fatty acids. Because essential fatty acids are just that, essential. And why is a Mediterranean diet healthier than a standard American diet? It's mainly the oils. It's a lot of other things like enjoying your food and not getting it processed. And I just got back from Tuscany, so I'm on an Italy kick. But anyway, the essential fatty acids are oils. So cook with more oil, coconut oil, macadamia nut oil, avocado oil, good extra virgin olive oil. Use more oils. Put oil in the bath that they're taking. It doesn't have to be a lot of expensive fish oil that you buy the supplements of, but good fish oils in general in the diet. So that would be my top 5.
That's great. Okay, so it looks like severe neuropsychiatric presentation. What do you test for first? And or treat? Psychiatry, Lyme, mold, pandas.
In my opinion, most psychiatric illness have an immune basis. And although we may need to put on a medication like an SSRI or an antipsychotic if the symptoms are severe enough, that's a Band-Aid. It may be a very good Band-Aid, but it's still treating the symptom, not treating the underlying root cause. So the first step, and why I have like 30 pages of questionnaires and a 3-hour initial visit, but I'm not taking new patients, but anyway, I do mentor a lot of people, and why I depend so much on history is I'm looking for which of those it is. Is it Borrelia? Is it Bartonella? Is it Babesia? Is it mold? Is it strep? Is it mycoplasma? I'm trying to figure out which it is without costing you any money except history. And then we decide, based on how much money you have, whether we can do any testing to prove if we're right or not. But in a lot of people that I mentor all over the years, none of them can, all over the world, none of them can afford any testing or don't have a doctor that will do any testing. And so why I use a lot of herbals, for example, is because they get many of these things at once. They will treat all of those at one time rather than pinpointing just one of them. So remember what we're talking about when we talk about severe neuropsychiatric illness, in my opinion, is an immune disorder. And so it doesn't matter what the trigger is as much. Yeah, we have to figure it out, but we have to treat it as if it's an immune disorder. See, I told you I was
It sounds so good. Where can I get more information about homeopathic treatments?
One of my colleagues and a brilliant naturopath is Dr. Lindsay Wells. She's in Trumbull, Connecticut now. And she is a wonderful naturopath, but also a wonderful homeopath. So it's Lindsay with an E, Lindsey, Wells, WELLSND.com. So go to her website, you'll learn more. It's also a great resilience naturopathy out west. They're also very good. And there are many great homeopaths, but those are 2 I use.
Okay, the next one I'm going to actually answer. So where can we get access to the slide deck? If you're both okay with me sharing the slides, email Lyme Connection at richfieldct.gov, and I'll send them to you. And if I don't respond promptly, you're welcome to email me again. It's Richfield, Lyme Connection. It's late. Lyme Connection at richfieldct.gov. Or you can also go to the Lyme Connection website and email us through there, because I'm now connected finally. Okay, O'Hara, Dr. O'Hara, where can we, slides again. Who should young adults see for PANS?
So both of the naturopaths I mentioned in Connecticut are excellent. Dr. Lindsay Wells and Dr. Mariah Hinchy both see young adults. Dr. Johnston, who is here, right?
Yep.
Also sees young adults, yes?
I do.
And is an excellent doctor. And I highly recommend, sees many of my patients. There's also a group called the Yaldenu Health Center, where I mentor, YALDEINU. They're in Brooklyn, New York. And there are many others, but those are all really good people who hopefully don't have too long waiting lists.
Yeah. Okay. This one is, what do you know about the genetic engineering mentioned on 60 Minutes on Sunday in Nantucket? Did you see that? Is that the mice vaccinating? That they're vaccinating. It's a study. They're vaccinating mice.
Oh, is that the MIT Kevin Estelle?
I think
This
so.
is where
Um,
it makes the mice immune to Lyme's, and then it goes through, their offspring. It carries through to the mice's offspring.
Right, and basically you're
And
gonna
breaks the whole chain.
engineer a mouse that doesn't get Lyme disease, pass Lyme disease, or, and it's
I
progeny.
just watched it, I just
Yeah,
had never heard about it.
I didn't know that there was a piece on 60 Minutes about it. I wrote about it in my book. I'm a little leery of engineering genetically anything, because what could go wrong? Yeah, I think we have to be really careful.
And then again, if you're for it, what about the deer, the birds, and everything else, squirrels?
And it's not practical to think we can do that for mice everywhere.
What
I
could
agree.
possibly go wrong with us
Exactly.
genetically engineering something out in the wild? Okay, this one is very specific, and you may not want to touch it, but I'll ask it. How can we help a 27-year-old has been sick for 15 years, had gotten better, but COVID sent him right back to bedridden? Diagnosed at 12 with PANS, misophonia, tics, OCD, and anxiety.
COVID probably reactivated Babesia. That's what I see a lot, and that needs to be treated. And finding a doctor or a practitioner of any sort who will help you can still, just like Mary Beth showed with that little boy that Dr. Jones helped, can still make a difference even at this point in time. There are also several interventions for COVID itself that have been helpful. One of those practitioners I mentioned before, I also have an excellent health coach. Her name is Dina. You can find her through our website, which was on the slide. So.
I think that's it. Does anybody have any other questions they want to?
Dropped a card, Karen. There's a card on the floor.
Yeah, I know, that was one of the ones I read, I think.
May I ask a question?
Oh, yeah.
What we're seeing a lot in our community that keeps popping up, especially on social media, is the amount of misinformation, and everyone is an expert. So someone in our community asks a question, should I be concerned? And you'll hear 10 different people, none of whom have a medical degree, say, no, you're good, you don't need to do anything. So for those gathered here today, those who can access, because we will have a link on our website, we've had a lot of interest from across the country and other parts of the world in seeing the presentation tonight. So for those who are newly bitten by a tick, the question is, what do I do? They've been told nothing, watch and wait for symptoms. What do you recommend?
So I have a very skewed population. So I see the sickest of the sickest and people with this disease for many, many years. So I am jaded. But if I had a tick bite or my son had a tick bite, I would immediately do what was on one of my sides. I would do Ledum 30C, which is a homeopathic remedy, and I would do several herbs because I can't prescribe for myself or my son, so I can't even put myself on antibiotics. It happened recently, and I couldn't get antibiotics for myself. So all of those herbs that I had on that slide, and I'm gonna just pull it up again if you don't, can we do that? Do you mind?
Yes.
Oh, okay, well, I'm gonna pull them up so I can read them and have it in front of me, so I don't say the wrong ones. Hold on one second, it's right here. So cat's claw, Japanese knotweed, Artemisia annua, and Cryptolepis. I do all of them because you need to, in this area of the country, you need to cover Borrelia, Babesia, and Bartonella. So that's what I do. And at a Clark's rule dosing, meaning if you're an adult, that would be at least 30 drops twice a day. If you're a 50-pound kid, that might be 10 drops twice a day. And that's what I do for somewhere between 1 and 3 months, and 1 month minimum. Now, at the same time, I'm hoping I have the tick and I send it off and the tick is negative, then I forget about it and I stop it. But if the tick is positive, then I'm going to continue it longer. But I feel very comfortable doing that. Certainly, in this area, if you have a doctor that's willing to prescribe doxycycline, you will at least be covering Borrelia, but you're not covering Babesia and you're not fully covering Bartonella. So I really am a believer in herbs, even in the acute situation.
So Dr. Howard, we're saying you don't wait for symptoms.
I do not wait for symptoms. I just, it's too prevalent around here. I'd rather be wrong and overtreat with something that's safe than miss it and have another child with chronic Lyme. That's just my opinion. So that's why I answer texts on the weekend of patients I have. What?
How do you find a Lyme doctor around here?
I would go to ILADS or MAPS website. So MAPS is medmaps.org and ILADS is ilads.org. It's ILADS something. There aren't many ILADS. You can just Google ILADS. And they have lists of providers. I've already mentioned a couple, Dr. Johnson, Dr. Wells, Dr. Hinchy, Summer Del Signore is in Beacon, New York, and there are others. But I don't know of any that accept insurance.
Go ahead.
Are you familiar with Morgellons?
Yes.
I've had Lyme since 1985, and I started the Long Island Lyme Association, the New York State Lyme Coalition, worked for the Arthritis Foundation. I was an activist, and I didn't get out of bed for a year, almost died. All negative tests. Dr. Joseph Broscano, my doctor, who saved my life. I'm still symptomatic all these years. Can't tell. No doctors can help. Insurance doesn't cover any treatments. My Morgellons has not been diagnosed. The dermatologist blacklisted me as a psycho person because I raw wounds all over my body. Crazy. But I wondered, no one with Morgellons doesn't have Lyme. But if you have Lyme, you don't automatically get Morgellons. Is that the way it works?
Correct.
And do you treat with ivermectin, creams, orals, anything? I can't get help. I just got an injection that seems to work. I'm in a study.
There are some treatments that are helpful, but it is a very, very tough vector-borne disease. Very much so. I'm sorry.
No, I know. And it's interesting, all the things you talked about, we knew in the 80s.
Yeah.
And here we are.
Well, you knew more than I did in the 80s.
We were chasing the answers, even Plum Island back then. Just a quick interesting thing, I was a Lyme resource consultant for a national pharmacy. And I got a phone call from someone in the Midwest who was running a support group. And she said, hurry up, put on TV, put on TV. So I went into the office, turned on my TV. There was a silhouette And the person was expressing all that was going on Plum Island with regards to biowarfare and Lyme disease. And I'm like, whoa, this is 1987? And I went, whoa, I turned around to get my chair, they cut it off. Gone. I said, whoa. So I'm just an activist crazy person, but I'm laughing because everything you're saying, except I wasn't involved with the homeopathics and the herbs as much as I would like to be now. I appreciate all that you're doing.
Was there a question back there? Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have an opinion on the Vibrant test?
It's not going to be popular if any of you like it. That is one of the labs with no validation studies for anything except one species of Borrelia. I will not even read a Vibrant tick-borne disease panel or a Vibrant neuroZoomer. That's how unreliable, inaccurate, marketing only, no validation studies those tests are. So if there's a Vibrant rep here, I'm happy to talk to you afterwards. After my last conference, the rep came up to me and said, "Why do you hate us so much?" And I said, "I don't hate you, I just want validation studies." And she sent me the same study that they send everybody, which was orchestrated by two people paid by Vibrant, which is just like what we see with pharma these days, and without validation of all the other pieces. So I have a little girl for a physician I mentored who is a vegetable because of that test. So I will never recommend it. So I'm on tape for that, sorry. Maybe you can delete that part out, just to go worldwide.
Yeah, right in the back.
What's the difference between homeopathic and herbal supplements?
Homeopathy was first developed by Dr. Hahnemann at Hahnemann Medical Center, and it's where you use like to treat like. So what homeopathy does is take a very, very minute dilution of something to help your body react to it. It's in the same theory of vaccines, but in a very, very low level to help your body develop immune tolerance and treat. Herbals are what are the mainstay of naturopathy, and they're plants. They're what medicines were based on hundreds of years ago. We just, as doctors, have gotten away from that and have no understanding of that. And so, but they're at the root of all health treatment in many countries. Certainly in Eastern medicine, much more so than in Western medicine.
Where can I find more information about the herbal treatments that you suggest?
Yeah, certainly you can find some on my website, but both Dr. Wells and Dr. Hinchy, who I mentioned, are great herbalists, naturopaths, and they can help you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So, you have a great approach. I love everything you have to say. I have been working with Lyme for 35 years. I go beyond the homeopathy into frequencies, so the frequency of the pathogen. And I have found that one of the reasons that the tests are skewed is because they're not testing for viruses. And when ticks travel around, they feed on dogs and mice and all kinds of other critters that pass viruses. That's a big part of the work that I do, and I think it's important. And I think that's why your herbs are also helping.
It may well be. And again, I go back to that first slide of follow those who seek the truth rather than those who have found it. I think most of us, including me, don't know enough about the energetic fields, frequencies, etc. But I am a big believer in accepting that and understanding that. I think viruses are at the root and part of everything, and I think we saw a big piece of that with COVID, but we see it with multiple different viruses. The biggest problem is we do not have any good antivirals, and we don't have any specific ones. I mean, think about the common cold. But those antioxidants and things I was talking about that everybody should be on, like vitamin D and zinc and a good multivitamin, those are your best antivirals. And so I think part of yes, the dis-ease and disease of our country is that we don't have enough of that foundational stuff that keeps us healthier from a lot of these things that are ubiquitous. So,
I think we can do like 2 more.
Can I just ask, the COVID spike proteins, mine was the 27-year-old boy. Should he be going to some specialist to get rid of, to be tested for it and to get rid of them?
I'm not sure if we can get rid of them or not. I don't know. You know, I use it as a marker that this is a disease that may be impacting this particular child. And you can get it from Quest or LabCorp or any conventional lab. But I to this end, and as Mary Beth said, we're learning a lot more about chronic Lyme from long COVID. But we don't have any more for long COVID than we really have for chronic Lyme as of yet. But knowing it can help lead us into looking at other antivirals, other foundational supports, other things that may be helpful. So I do use it.
Peter McCullough, who's a cardiologist who became quite prominent during the pandemic and treated in different ways than the mainstream, has written about and studied nattokinase and bromelain for
I listen to
spike
podcasts
reduction.
every day, all the time.
He sells the bottle.
He does. He's a little bit conflicted right now in terms of what he's advocating and what he's selling. So I just would put that out there. But supposedly there's some evidence that it works, but it's not just spike left behind by COVID, it's spike left behind by the vaccines. That's what they used to prompt our immune systems to allegedly fight COVID. Wasn't a good approach in my view. And I've had my spike protein tested and it's 2,500, and that's from 2 shots, which I wouldn't get again.
Agree, as long as I don't lose my license over agree.
Okay, go ahead.
Do you have any experience with the Dr. Zhang protocol?
The what?
The Dr. Zhang protocol?
Yeah, I've used it successfully in several patients. Dr. Zhang is the question.
Dr. Zhang.
Yeah.
Is there? Yeah, go ahead, 1 more.
Kind of piggybacking off of that, like the butter protocol, would you think of this as like a good resource for people trying to learn about like the herbal medicine aspect of everything?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Very good. That's what Mariah follows. Yeah.
If anyone wants to take pictures of this after, you'll have to be over there.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Can I ask you-